Hey, you all. Dr. Franklin here, Norfolk State University. I just wanted to take a few minutes and talk about the action stage as encapsulated in Clara Hill's three-stage model that deals with exploration, insight, and action. Have a few slides here. I'm hoping to very succinctly cover the action stage, and then I'll interlay within my presentation some examples that I think articulate some of the salient points that I want you to remember. So, after clients have adequately explored their issues and gained insight into their causes, then the next logical step is some sort of action. Action may involve the clients changing unhelpful thinking patterns and as a result experiencing less unhelpful emotions, and or it could involve the client changing certain behaviors. So, someone with borderline personality disorder may have insight into why they become emotionally dysregulated and reactive to the slightest provocation or disagreement in their relationship. They may come to terms with some of their traumatic experiences, unhealthy relational patterns, and anger, which masks the underlying sadness and pessimism about the future of the relationship. But if said individual does not cultivate new ways of thinking about the relationship and their traumatic experiences of loss and abandonment, nor discover and use new ways of slowing down physiological reactions, then many ingrained habits will likely continue to occur. As a therapist, it's important to look for markers that indicate it is time to move to action. If a clinician is working with a person who has PTSD as a result of deployments in the Army while they were enlisted as an infantryman, that is, their MOS or mission of service was infantry, and they've had the unfortunate experience of observing people in their squad or battalion being mutilated and killed by way of IEDs, after discussing their traumatic experience and how it severely hampers their ability to move in public, that is, under bridges or in crowded spaces, the individual may spontaneously move toward the action stage. That's the most ideal situation. The clinician then may come alongside the client, help them by exposing them in their imaginations to crowds and bridges, to shortly be followed by in person desensitization, while providing them with coping skills to deal with any extreme physiological experiences that may occur while encountering triggering events. Sometimes, when people are in crisis or crises, action is required immediately, and there's not time to go through the exploration stage and insight stage in graduated fashion. If someone is suicidal and has expressed plans, intentions, and means to harm themselves, then maintaining confidentiality in the hopes that you can establish and build rapport and help them gain insight into why they feel the way they do would be contraindicated for obvious reasons. Another example is if someone is severely malnourished as a result of an eating disorder, anorexia or otherwise, then it makes sense to address their physical body needs first, perhaps in an academic medical center, and while they are physically getting what they need from dietitians and they're being monitored, then the helping professional staff can work alongside all other key workers and provide them psychological intervention in consultation form. One of the benefits of the academic medical center is that there's likely integrated care, and medical professionals and clinicians work alongside each other, allowing the client to get everything they need in one space as opposed to having to rely on outpatient therapy here, primary care provider over here, etc. So, some issues require immediate intervention that is more action oriented, and then the exploration and insight things may occur concurrently or after the major threats to personal harm are addressed. Behavioral theories lay the foundation for the action stage, and there are several assumptions as you see listed in the slide. One of the defining characteristics of the action stage is that behaviors are learned, and these behaviors are learned by way of operant conditioning, modeling, and cognitive theory. When we talk about operant conditioning, of course, we're talking about B.F. Skinner's approach, talking about the usage of primary reinforcers, secondary reinforcers, concepts like extinction and punishment and behavior shaping. And when we're talking about modeling, we're oftentimes relying on Bandura and his thoughts as it related to social learning. And cognitive theory puts a great emphasis on stimulation, organization, response. Now, given your theoretical understanding of the action stage, how you may go about employing that with different demographics, be children or adults, could be extremely useful and varied. Okay. Operant conditioning is more likely to be employed with children. Imagine trying to sit down with a 7-year-old and explore and process their delinquent behavior at school, the influence of their parents' parenting style on their delinquent behavior, the dynamics of their peer relations, etc. It may prove to be extremely difficult to do all of that, that is, to go through the three-stage model as articulated by Clara Hill, and thus it may make more sense to gradually shape their behavior alongside other key figures in their lives. When we talk about stimulation organization response, it's important to know that it's central to cognitive theory, and in many ways, it adds on how behaviors typically think about behavior. It may be important to consider, and this is what the theory emphasizes, how people think about events rather than immediately focusing on how they are reacting to a specific event. Goals of the action stage involve helpers encouraging clients to explore possible new behaviors, assist clients in deciding on new behaviors, facilitate the development of skills for action, provide feedback about attempted changes, evaluate and modify action plans, and encourage processing of feelings about actions. It's important to note that skills used in the action stage are not used as discreetly as they are used in the exploration stage and insight stages. It's also important to note that each of these three stages are not independent of each other, and that in varied fashion, all of these stages show up in each individual stage. Skills are used to accomplish the steps of working on four different types of action: relaxation, behavior change, behavioral rehearsal, and decision making. The most used skills are open questions and probes for actions, which will hopefully stimulate clients in thinking about possible action. Starting with open questions and probes, it's helpful to get the client to consider what they have done, what they think they should try, and their perceived consequences of trying a new action. If a client is struggling with opioid addiction and has gathered insight into how their peer influenced them at an earlier age to engage, and they want to make changes, it might be helpful to explore with the client what that change looks like, how they think it will affect them, and process with them some of the benefits of those changes. Surely, no longer being in close proximity of individuals that abuse poly substances could have the benefits of removing environmental triggers during a precarious point of enacting change, but the end result is also a loss of social capital and connection, which would need to be addressed to ensure that as a result of not having a new activity, the opiate usage does not emerge once more. And giving information is key in the action stage as well, in that it could help clients go about change. Seldomly do clinicians sit in therapy spaces and provide a verbal literature review on the issue at hand, one that's not very culturally sensitive in most cases, as it's important to meet clients where they are. And even if one was interacting with a client who is a scientist, it would be important for the clinician to assess their motives for wanting to discuss randomized clinical trials in detail. What might be helpful, though, is providing succinct information that could assist the client in making decisions. So, talking about the extent to which the environment, social environment, housing situation, social isolation could impact one's addiction could be helpful if done briefly and in a sensitive way. Or you could simply use the information you know as a basis for some of the questions that you ask as a means of assessing where the client is as far as change in behavior or insight. Giving feedback involves exactly what it sounds like. You are providing information to the client on their behavior and how it may impact others. You are doing this as a means to promote change, which may cause the clients to feel understood, take responsibility, and establish new ways to behave. And as a result, I guess it is possible for some clients to feel misunderstood. Clinicians, in many ways, can serve as a mirror for their clients in this regard, providing them with information on how they present in a way that can foster insight can be extremely beneficial. If a clinician and client are working on social skills, in particular being assertive within the context of negotiations at work, and they are role playing in interaction with a superior, it would be helpful for the clinician to tell the client if they are averting eye contact during key moments, barely audible in terms of volume when discussing their work performance and why the raise is warranted, etc. It can be difficult for clinicians to withhold bad news, and it could be met with resistance in the therapy space. So, the timing of the feedback is really important, as well as awareness of where an individual is within the therapy session, as well as the overall relationship. There are times when not sharing the information may hinder progress or not help the client move forward. While working as a practicum student at Kenner Army Health Clinic, I was working with an officer in the Army who I diagnosed with anxiety disorder unspecified. He was really anxious across various areas of his life, marital relationship, peer relationships, and as a sergeant in the military responsible for a great body of people. He was anxious because he was incredibly self conscious about his perceived hyperhidrosis condition, which is a condition that causes individuals to sweat excessively. He was really concerned about the body odor, which he thought he was omitting, and this in turn caused him to struggle to be present in his relationships. Your text reading talks about the mum effect, and I didn't fall victim to that, but rather I did not give him feedback, which may have been perceived as good. Despite session after session of meeting with him, exploring the etiology of his concerns, discussing with him the extent to which the condition had been verified by medical professionals, discussing with him reactions, family history, considering other rule outs in the DSM, I did not give him direct feedback about how I experienced him in the therapy space. I was early on in my training and it didn't occur to me the benefits of giving him feedback until I had a supervision session with my clinical supervisor and processed out my concerns about my feedback potentially invalidating his very real experiences of feeling like everyone was observing him sweating profusely and everyone was disoriented by his smell. But after discussing the potential upside in a co session, my supervisor and I both told him that in all of our encounters, we had not smelled him or even perceived him to be sweating profusely. I recall he was very taken aback by the feedback. And I'm not being facetious here, but shock literally washed across his face. And perhaps there is truth to sometimes it comes down to who is telling you something versus what is being said. And we continued to talk about coping skills he could employ in situations where he was anxious. And we explored anxiety symptoms tied to some other areas of his life, which weren't necessarily the hyperhidrosis condition. But I didn't see him much longer after that, scholars. So being able to give your clients feedback is helpful. Feedback in general, as well as feedback in regard to learning activities within the session, is beneficial as long as it's done in a sensitive and cautious way that emphasizes the strengths of the client and it occurs in close proximity of the occurrence of the behavior. All right, you all. Moving on to process advisement. Process advisement is helpful, and as seen in Dr. Clara Hill's Helping Skills DVD, you saw them employ it very early on in the helping stage process as a means of getting clients to explore feelings more as opposed to thoughts. Depending on who the clinician is interfacing with, it may be beneficial to use it as a means of getting clients to explore more thoughts if they appear to be fixated on their emotional experience. Process advisement is primarily used in the action stage through behavioral exercises such as behavioral rehearsal or role playing exercises or even relaxation. As an example, I'll reflect on one of my practicum experiences. A key part of TFCBT is the cultivation of relaxation skills prior to getting the client to discuss their trauma narrative and share it with their parents. So I engaged in process advisement by directing my child client to position themselves in a chair and systematically tense parts of their body as a means of relaxing. So this involved me directing them to furrow their brow as if they were trying to trap an ant in the bridge of their nose and tense their neck to be nice and stiff like a giraffe's neck. Process advisement can be utilized as I used it to promote change in session and encourage activity outside of session. As it relates to encouraging activity outside of session, term that comes to mind is direct guidance, which involves the clinician making suggestions, giving directives, and providing advice for what clients should do outside of sessions. Listen, there's no shortage of individuals having advice or suggestions about how people should live their lives. In the information age, due to the boon of the internet, there is no shortage of this. The issue, though, with direct guidance from these various people, which have different cultural backgrounds, varying levels of education and expertise and experience, etc., is that it's often provided without thorough exploration. The wrong problem is being addressed, or the recipient may think that it's not necessary to explore all angles of the problem. And therein lies some of my gripe with social media influencers, some experts on talk shows, and sometimes the news discussing the latest tragedy and bringing on the world renowned expert, individuals providing relational advice, or Simply the YouTuber trying to get you to make the best charcuterie board. Here's the thing, people. What if you simply do not have the cheese? And what if Arby's indeed has all the meats? What do? The YouTuber simply did not assess the contents of my cabinet, nor did they provide me with the financial resources to put together the most mind blowing, stomach moving edible arrangement, and thus their advice is inefficient. Anyway, you all will one day be giving direct guidance in the form of homework of some sort that will be based on solid knowledge and experience after extensive client exploration and insight. If you have the client do something that is relevant to their problem and you couch the homework correctly, then the client is more likely to be receptive and actually complete the homework assignment. It should be noted, all direct guidance should be done collaboratively with the helper and client constructing the direct guidance. Finally, I just want to briefly touch on disclosure strategies. One can disclose strategies that they have used within a therapeutic setting, but the danger in doing so is that the client may be tempted to do exactly what you did, even though it may not be what is best for them. Of course, the upside is that it may foster a deep connection and relationship, instill hope, etc. So, at the surety of sounding redundant and direct, I would highly encourage you to reserve consideration of disclosure of strategies for later on in your development if you are a beginning helper. Okay, so that is an overview of the action stage. There's still much to be covered regarding the steps in working with the four action tasks of relaxation, behavioral rehearsal, decision making, and behavior change. But here, I just wanted to provide an overview along with some examples. Hope this helped. Take care.